This is how a lot of Christians see the Last Judgment. I will come before God by myself, and he will put up on a movie screen everything I've ever done, and I will be shamed in front of all of heaven, which is totally not a biblical image.
No,
I
it couldn't
think
be.
what happens for the saints, we come before the throne, and Jesus says, "Come, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you for the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink." And we, because we just got there and we don't know what's going on, are like, "But Jesus, when did I do that?" And Jesus will turn to the assembled crowd and say, "Saints, tell them about it."
Welcome to the SoulSense podcast from Samaritan's Well here in North Texas. And today we've got Tony Stoltzfus from Northern California.
Yep.
He is an author, a coach, a trainer who spent more than 25 years helping people experience lasting transformation through really encounters with Jesus rather than just willpower and self-discipline. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So glad to have you. We were just talking before we got on about a couple of your books. One of them, if you could hold it up, is called Heaven, Experience the Extraordinary. That's cool. I love the cover. The cover is cool. It's called Heaven, Experience the Extraordinary. And then right before we started, you were telling me about another book, a very provocative title. I love the title, How to Read the Bible Like a Human Being.
Right.
I love that title. But really, that's about being able to read the Bible in an experiential way, almost like putting yourself there. Is that correct, Tony?
Right. Yeah. And when you just read the Bible rationally, what your rational brain does is it distances yourself from the thing that you're thinking about to be objective. And so you experience God at a distance when you read the Bible that way. And it tends to emphasize his deity. When you read with your emotional brain wants to involve itself to understand. So you get a whole different experience, and you connect in a much deeper way with Jesus's humanity. So
I love that. I love that, Tony. And so you were saying you did a lot of research in literally what that time was like to be able to read that book. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, well, I spent 4 months in Israel trying to visit all the places where Jesus was, and went to the dusty research libraries and looked things up. I also spent the better part of 3 years full time. I built 2 bookcases to contain the books that I bought for this project.
Oh my goodness.
And I was reading all these obscure things like diseases of the ancient world and letter writing in the ancient world, and just fascinating stuff about little daily things that you wouldn't think of as a 21st century American that completely changed the way you perceive stuff in Scripture. Here's a little, for instance.
Wonderful.
So the woman who anointed Jesus right before his crucifixion, she poured a pound of perfume over him. So a Roman pound is 12 ounces. So think a Coke can. So Jesus has a Coke can full of perfume poured over his head. And perfumes today are alcohol-based, so they evaporate. In those days, perfumes were oil-based. So Jesus has, think 12 ounces of olive oil poured over you. So when Jesus is standing before Pilate a couple days later, he still smells like $1 million because that perfume is all over his clothes and his body and everything. So I'm sure that must have given Pilate a little bit of pause.
I'm sure it did. See, that alone gives you a lot of different perspective. And that research, I'm sure, comes out all throughout the Bible. Tony, go back 25 years. How did you get in the business of helping people? What got you into it? Tell us a little about your story, Tony.
Well, this is more than 25 years. It's more like 40 years.
Now more like 40. Okay, there you go.
But one of the starting places, when I was in my early 20s, I was Mr. Discipline. I had my yearly goals and my monthly goals and my Bible study plan and my hour of power. And I prayed with another guy 3 times a week for an hour. And I fasted twice a week. And that was what I thought it meant to live the radical Christian life, was to do these disciplines. And at the same time, I'm consistently praying to God, help me understand grace, because I knew there was something there that I didn't get. And so what God did was, it was like he turned off the spigot of my self-discipline, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't hardly stand to read the Bible. I'd go to pray and get so frustrated I'd leave in 5 minutes. And I just, after a year and a half of this, I finally just said to God, I give up. I can't live the Christian life. I can't do this. I'm worthless. If you can make anything out of my life, you do it, but I'm through. And then God started to speak to me that he loved me. And I hadn't really heard him speaking for a while. But for 6 weeks, I rebuked that voice. This cannot be God because I'm not doing it right. Therefore, you can't love me. And it finally started to penetrate my thick skull that God loved me because he loved me and not because I was a good boy. And that good boy thing has been my original wound, was choosing that identity to protect myself from pain. And my whole life story has been about God working that back out of me. But one of the upshots of that experience is that ever after that, when I started to discipline anything in my relationship with God, I would immediately fall into this legalistic hole. And so I had to try to figure out, how do you change when you can't lean on self-discipline? Because that's the way most Christians do it. It was the way I was taught, but I couldn't make it work. And so what's actually happened in my life is my main growth has been through meeting God in the circumstances of my life. So when I'm betrayed or when something negative happens or whatever, saying, okay, God, what are you doing? How are you trying to shape me? And how can I get in line with what you're doing through my circumstances instead of just fighting them? So all the best things that I know and do and help others with have come out of that process.
That is a beautiful, concise testimony, Tony. And it seems like so much goes back to, no matter what hits us, there's more than enough grace for it if we're able to apply for it, if we're able to
Right.
receive it. Is that kind of a word that you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, I can fast forward 40 years from that and we're still
Yeah.
working on it. But 2 years ago, I was in Maui visiting our son, and I'm walking on this road. Oprah has a house on this road. It's just gorgeous view of the ocean and the mountains. And I'm going along, and Jesus says, Tony, you've lived for significance, and there's a whole other kind of life you could have if you're willing to try it. And I was like, oh, okay. I don't know what you mean, but okay. And what's been happening is realizing, like one little thing was, I used to take my daily walk right next to our house. There's a hill next to a busy highway, and I would walk up and down this hill because I could get my exercise in the least amount of time. Well, I could drive for 3 minutes and get to another path that goes through a nature area and the same walk, but beautiful. But I didn't do it because 3 minutes. I got to get back to what's productive and meaningful and strategic. And God is like, hey, how about if we take the other walk? And things like, I was a furniture designer early in life and had a bunch of beautiful furniture that I made that all burned when our house burned down. But after I left there, I never thought I'd make furniture again, because to do it in your garage after you've had a 20,000 square foot woodworking shop is so inefficient. But I started making stuff again because everything I had was destroyed. And I realized one day, if I'm doing this for fun and it takes twice as long, that's just twice as much fun. Oh, okay. But I'm finding these ways that I squeezed joy out of my life to make room for impact. And what Jesus is saying to me is, your assignment in your retirement is to be content. to not go after like this book. I spent 3
Uh-huh.
years full time on this book. And
That's something.
at the beginning God said, your job from now on, your job is just to write it. You don't need to promote it. And I was like, great, God has this whole new promotional thing for me that he's going to drop on me. And I kept waiting and waiting, and nothing dropped. And I published it. And then Jesus said, I don't want you to promote this. And so it hasn't done very much. I haven't sold very many copies. I'm still doing Bible studies with people because I love it.
Mhm.
But that was like, oh, it's 3 years of my life. But man, me and Jesus had a good time studying and being able to say it's enough. I don't have to change the world. I don't have to do something great. Where Jesus is happy with me. So that's my current journey.
I love that testimony, Tony, and I think that if we as believers could get to that kind of simplicity and just kind of get out of our own way, so to speak. What got you on that path towards teaching and writing about heaven?
Well, a couple things. In my 20s, I had a dream where I was in heaven that really impacted me. And I thought afterward, I want to make a movie about heaven someday, because if people could just experience it, if they could experience what it's like, they'd give anything to go there. And so when I started training and doing stuff like that, I would incorporate heaven into what we did. So like all our workshops had a 90-minute heaven experience where we had actors and staging and wrote original music and lighting and all these things to give people an experience of what it would be like to be in heaven. And that's how we kicked off all of our workshops. And then in one of the workshops, it was about learning from your life and, meeting Jesus in your difficulties. And so I took this big step of faith. I had 30 people come to the workshop, and I emailed them all and said, okay, for this workshop, I want to interview you about the worst thing that ever happened in your life. And I'm going to rewrite your story from heaven's perspective, and you'll get it at the workshop. And I had never done it before in that form. And so I had 30-hour-long interviews about people's divorces, abuse, deaths in the family, the worst things of life. And then immediately after the interview, I would sit down, and usually I had one idea to start with, and I would start writing their story, and Jesus would meet me as I wrote. And an hour or so later, I'd have their story from heaven's perspective. And I've since trained a team, and we've done several hundred of these stories. But for that month, when I was doing those interviews, I got in this mode where I felt like I could ask Jesus any question I could think of about heaven, and I'd get an answer. So I ended up with 80 pages of notes of what
Did
heaven was
you?
like. And that was the genesis of this book. So a lot of the book is just about what it would be like to live in a multidimensional heaven, a heaven where you don't have to obey the physical laws. Gravity is optional, and you can walk on the ground or you can fly. Well, if you could fly, what would you do with that? Or where the river of the water of life is a river that flows. There's an interesting passage where it flows down the middle of the street in Revelation. And I envision the river actually doing exactly that. There's a street, and the river is flowing on the street, not in it, because it's not a river of earth water. It's a river of the life of God going out from his throne, and you can walk into it and breathe the life of God. What would that feel like? Well, dang, your body's tingling all over with energy because pure life is touching you. And how does reality look different when you're in the middle of God's life flow? So trying to imagine just what life in heaven would be like. And then the other main focus of the book is, what does heaven do with these painful experiences we have on earth? And how does it make all things well? And there's a number of chapters that are based on stories I wrote for people of how God took their pain and was able to make it all well. I can share one of mine if you want.
I would love for you to share one of yours or any that you want to, because
Sure.
that's profound.
So I was, we had moved across the country to be part of this ministry, and the leader at a vulnerable place in our lives asked us for a loan, and we loaned him our life savings. And it took 5 years to get it back and destroyed our relationship. And, there's reasons why you don't do that kind of thing.
Yes.
But I saw a counselor for a year and finally got down to, I had this belief that my destiny was dependent on the favor of these great men of God that I worked with. And that if I lost their favor, I would lose my significance, my call, my destiny. And I had to reach the point of saying, my destiny is in the hands of me and God alone, and no one else can stand between me and that, no matter what happens to me. But years later, so this counselor that I worked with was coming to one of our workshops. In fact, the one where we rewrite people's stories. So I had an interview with him. He has traveled the world and done inner healing work with pastors and leaders all over the globe. And his story was, my father was a pastor called to be influential in his community. He had a moral failure, and he was in the process of going through restoration and died suddenly. And so his big question for God was, what happened to my dad's destiny? Because he was never able to fulfill it. And the story God gave me for him was, every destiny is a shared destiny, that God has taken the things that your dad was not able to accomplish and given a big bunch of it to you. And you've fulfilled that bigger than he ever dreamed, because you've helped hundreds of pastors finish well and be influential. So when you go to heaven, you're going to be able to come to your dad and say, Dad, I know you failed and fell, but God gave those parts of your destiny to me, and I finished them bigger than you ever dreamed. So here, share with me in the reward of your fulfilled destiny. And in that moment, the word of God will not have returned to him void, but will have accomplished the purpose he sent it out for. And it was a beautiful story, and he really liked it. And a few weeks later, he calls me about something else, and just out of the blue says, where are you at in your healing journey with this guy? And it's 10 years later. And God just spoke to me in that moment, said, that story is you. If that betrayal had not happened, all these books I've written, we would have written together. Our names would be on both of them. We had a thing we were called to do together, and it fell apart. But God's given a big chunk of that to me. And I've done things bigger than I ever dreamed back then in my 30s. So when I get to heaven, I'm going to get to go to this guy and say, I know our relationship fell apart, but God gave this part of our destiny to me, and I've taken it around the world and finished it bigger than we ever dreamed. So here, share with me in the reward of our completed destiny. And in that moment in heaven, our relationship will be everything God ever intended it to be, because we'll be together with no animosity, sharing in the reward of what he gave us to do. So, probably the biggest betrayal of my life, heaven makes it well and better than well. And that's what we have to look forward to.
Tony, that has to be one of the most childlike testimonies that I've ever heard. And I mean that in the best sense of Matthew 18:3. Unless you become like this little child, you will in no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. And that story that you just told of sharing destiny in someone that you or anyone else could so easily be, even if it's secret, holding against that person or that mentor, to be able to so fully release it that you can envision sharing that with them in heaven. That's profound.
Yeah.
I love that. I can only imagine what all those other, 30 people at that seminar experienced.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness in the last year. And one of the unfortunate ways that we teach it is if you don't forgive, the only one you're hurting yourself is yourself. In other words, forgive people so that you can benefit. But that's not what the Bible teaches about forgiveness. I think when Jesus hung on the cross, he forgave the men who tortured him to death. I don't think that when he gets to heaven, he calls backsies and now I'm going to judge you for this. He asked Father to forgive them, and I believe Father did. And you see with Stephen, when he's being stoned, he says, "Don't count this sin against them." I think Father answers that prayer and says, "No, I won't." So when you forgive someone on earth, whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. When you forgive someone in earth, God comes alongside you and says, "Yes, you're acting like me, so I will honor that in heaven." And when I realized that, it was like, dang, who else can I forgive? Because forgiveness isn't just for me, and it's not just for this earth. Forgiveness endures into the coming kingdom. And I like to envision the last judgment. We see the last. This is how a lot of Christians see the last judgment. I will come before God by myself, and He will put up on a movie screen everything I've ever done, and I will be
Right.
shamed in front of all of heaven. Which is totally not a biblical image.
No,
I
it couldn't
think
be.
what happens for the saints, we come before the throne and Jesus says, "Come, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you for the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink." And we, because we just got there and we don't know what's going on, are
No.
like, "But Jesus, when did I do that?" And Jesus will turn to the assembled crowd and say, "Saints, tell them about it." And people will start to come out of the crowd and say, "You stopped beside the road from me when I was broken down, and you paid for my car to be fixed." And Jesus will say, "Yeah, when you did that, you did it for me. So thanks." And hundreds of people will come out of the crowd and talk about what we've done for Jesus. And it will be a community affair, because in the New Testament era, people could not envision life outside of community. It wasn't individualistic like it is now. And then we'll say to Jesus, "But what about these mistakes that I made? What about when I wronged this person?" And Jesus will
Yes.
turn to the crowd and say, "Saints, tell them about it." And people will come out of the crowd and say, "Yeah, you said that hurt me, but I did the hard work of forgiving, and I'm not pressing charges." And the judge will say, "Well, if you're not pressing charges, I guess there's nothing to judge you for. I absolve you." And we will minister forgiveness to each other in heaven, and God will cheer us on as we do it.
That's a beautiful scene. I've never pictured it like that. You're already making me think about heaven in a different way, Tony. Could you tell us, you probably thought about this, why do you think that it seems like there's so little spoken of or meditated on about heaven in our churches? Because I've been in church for now over
Right.
60 years, and I've heard so little about it, except that we all need to aspire to go there.
Right. I think it's because we've had this ethic with the Word of God, only Scripture and nothing beyond it. And so when it comes to Scripture, we refuse to use our imaginations because we don't think we're supposed to. We're not like part of what launched this project of how to read the Bible like a human being was realizing one day my pictures of scenes in the Bible come from Sunday school, because that was the last time they taught me with pictures about
That's
what the
true.
Bible said. And I've never revamped my pictures because they took the pictures out of my Bible. And so we've taken on this unspoken belief that when it comes to Scripture, I can't imagine anything outside of what is explicitly written down. So, like, oh, what's an example? The woman who with the issue of blood.
Yes.
So my Sunday school picture of her was they're out in this field somewhere, out in the landscape, and they meet and Jesus ministers to her. Well, And there's no surroundings, because
Mm-hmm,
where I
mm-hmm.
learned that story was with the flannel board. And there are little figures, in the flannel
Yes.
graph, and there's nothing out here. But
Yes.
I think that story happened inside Capernaum, because I think Jairus is the ruler of the synagogue in Capernaum. And it has to do with the timing of all the stuff. But so they're walking through the streets of Capernaum to go to Jairus's house. And these streets are narrow and crooked. Some of them are, you could touch both walls with your hands. And there's a 10-foot stone wall on either hand. So this poor woman who's been rejected from her community, can't live with them, can't touch anyone, decides to seek healing. She's anemic, she's weak. So she hides in a corner of the street. And as Jesus comes by, she comes out and tries to just brush the corner of his robe, which is in the small of his back, not down on the ground. And the word for touch there in Greek is a heavy touch. So I think she got jostled into him. And Jesus turns around and says, "Who touched me?" And this poor woman is trying to do this on the down low, And when somebody stops in a moving crowd and they're the center of attention, what happens to the crowd? Well, they all sort of accordion up against the person. So she's pushed up against Jesus, who's looking over her head and saying, "Who touched me?" And right next to Jesus is Jairus. And the ruler of the synagogue was the one who enforced the purity rules in the synagogue. So he's essentially the chief of police. So she's just broken the law, and their religious law is like our civil law. It's like a traffic violation law. So she's broken the law. The prophet discovers her. Right next to him is the chief of police, and she has a panic attack. She's literally trembling, is what the
Yeah.
Bible says. And Jesus says to her, she gushes it all out, and Jesus calls her daughter. There's nowhere else in the New Testament where Jesus calls another specific woman daughter. And that's a family healing. She's been rejected and cast out by her family for a dozen years. And Jesus says, "No, you are part of the family. You're a daughter." And then he says, "Your faith has made you well," which is directed to the crowds as much as to her. In an honor shame culture, it's almost impossible to regain your honor unless someone of higher stature advocates for you. So what Jesus is saying is he's speaking to her community and saying, this person is worthy to be accepted back into the community, because look what Adonai has done for her. Her faith was enough for Adonai to heal her. So he heals her emotionally and physically and socially, all in that one moment. And then a messenger comes up and says to Jairus, "Your daughter is dead." And there's an interesting little datum in the story. The woman's been bleeding for 12 years, and Jairus' daughter is 12 years old. Why did they put that detail in there? And I think in that moment, Jairus, we're going to heal my daughter who's on the point of death. And Jesus stops at the 7-Eleven to witness to the cashier, And Jairus is freaking out. And the messenger comes right after he's healed this woman, who was part of Jairus' synagogue, and says, "Your daughter's dead." And I can imagine Jairus thinking, my sin has come on my own head. I rejected this woman who the prophet has healed, and my daughter died in her stead. And that's when Jesus says, "Don't be afraid, just believe, come with me." Um, so when you put all the details together, there's layers of meaning and stuff going on that you just don't see without understanding the culture and the location.
That is the best rendering of that story I've ever heard, Tony. And I can't but think that it all started because that woman began to imagine and build her faith by
Mm-hmm.
saying, if I can just touch the hem of his garment,
Right.
I'll be made whole.
Right.
So it started with her sanctified imagination, wouldn't we say?
Mm-hmm.
And building her faith. And then, of course, she's like all of us, faith without corresponding action is dead. She couldn't just stay on her
Right.
couch. She had to go find him.
Right. Yeah, the way a first century person would understand faith, we sort of think of faith as a state of mind, that I'm
Mm-hmm.
supposed to think that this is going to happen and not have any doubtful thoughts occur to me. So faith happens inside my head. For a
Mm-hmm.
first
Mm-hmm.
century person, faith was something you did. So like the woman who Elijah comes to and says, "Feed me first and God will provide for you." What he's saying is, act like you got faith and it will work. Your action is your faith. And we have this tendency to tie ourselves in mental knots over, am I thinking in a faith-filled way? When
Mm-hmm.
the issue is just, am I going to do the thing that faith requires? It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter how I feel or what I
Mm-hmm.
think. Am I going to do it?
Yes, am I going to do it? I told this once, probably a year or two ago, but the family story after my great grandfather had been kicked in the head by a mule. He left, I think, if I'm not mistaken, five daughters and his wife. That first year, the family had helped her stay on the farm and raise the crops, but Grandma Jane's had to go and pay the property taxes. They had them all the way back in the 1890s, right? And it was in rural Arkansas. As I recall, the property tax that year was something a little less than $4, maybe $3.80. And it seems like she had $2 and a nickel. But
Mm-hmm.
she decided on the day it was due, she's going to take off by faith and go pay her taxes. And she gets about halfway there and she sees what looks like a bill in front of her on Muddy Lane up there, not too far from Imboden, Arkansas. And she gets up to it and it's a $2 bill,
Mm-hmm.
probably a lot like $100 bill would be
Yeah.
to us today. She picks it up, goes and pays her taxes, and has a little change left over. And that's a depiction. And you're right. Take the ark up to the Jordan, and then it will open. Take
Uh-oh.
the action, right? You're right. I think we do a lot of mental gymnastics for faith.
Right. Right. Yeah. Like I think of when I first started, you know, publishing books and stuff, I had left this ministry and most of my income went away. And we were casting around for, we got young kids, we're homeschooling, I have no job.
Whoa.
And I felt, and God, I'm on the road, the 6-lane highway in Virginia Beach in front of Walmart, stopped at the stop sign. And God says to me, if you don't believe in yourself enough to invest in yourself, you'll never do what you're capable of doing.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay, I know what we're supposed to do. We're going to take our savings and we're going to borrow that and we're going to use it to start our business.
Hmm.
And so we took that money and put it in the bank, and every month we watched it go down. And I had given us 2 years to get to an income. And we
Mm-hmm.
got to the end of the 2 years and we had just paid our taxes, and I had a book ready to go to the publisher, and it was going to take everything we had left in the bank. Um, so there's, a minor panic at this point, but
Yes.
I was
Minor
like,
panic.
this is what God told us to do. So let's do it. So we took the rest of our money and published that book. And that book, it paid for its first printing in 6 weeks. And that book has basically supported us for about 15 years,
Is that right?
and enabled me to do what I'm doing now. But we had to, it started with a step of faith because I didn't like borrowing, and it ended with a step of faith that we're going to put our last penny into this. And it seems like God, the whole thing of providing at the last minute, I think what it comes down to is just, you got to get to the point where this is your only option. Because we've always got our parachutes and our contingency plans and our, if this doesn't work, I'm going to do this. And it's not that God, the last minute is better. It's just that we've gotten to the point where we're actually operating in faith because we're doing a risky thing and we don't have a fallback plan. So,
That's profound. That's profound. Tony, let me ask you a couple practical questions. You've helped so many people through your writing and your teaching and training and coaching. For someone carrying that grief or trauma or anxiety, tell us about how they can approach Jesus in a way that feels safe and helps them towards healing.
okay. Well, one of the simple tools I use, I call this the fellowship of his sufferings, that I might know him in the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. So what's fellowship? When you meet somebody new at church, what's the first thing you do? You ask them questions about where they work and who they are and what they do. And what you're looking for is common areas of interest or experience. So you can fellowship around something you share. So the fellowship of sufferings means when you suffer, you have something in common with Jesus, who is the man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and you can talk to him about it, and you can share your experience and he can share his. So when your house burns down and you lose everything, like I did, you go to, by the way, 3 weeks before the fire, I'm out in the yard praying. And I remember saying, Jesus, could I really live without all this stuff? And God didn't
Whoa.
burn my house down.
No,
That's not who he is. But I got an answer real quick.
you did, and
um,
you survived. Oh my, that's
yeah,
painful though.
but
That's trauma. That is trauma.
yeah, but I can go to Jesus and say, Jesus, we've lost every memento we have about our kids, and the videos are gone, the photos are gone. Um, that really sucks. How did it feel to you when you lost your dad? Um, your world completely shifted. What was that like for you? When you buried him in the ground, what did you feel? What did you experience? And and Jesus will communicate to you out of his heart, because this is the thing I learned about prayer that really supercharged my prayer life is we have a tendency to pray about the business of being a Christian. God, what do you want me to do? God, what's your will for my life? God, what am I called to do? Oh, I did something wrong. I'm sorry. And all our prayers have do in them. And when I started praying just to have a conversation and get to know each other, my percentage of answered prayer went up like 1,000%. And my conclusion was, oh, this is what you want to talk about. That other stuff, I get answers sometimes. But when I talk to you about who I am and who you are, I can't ask a question without getting an answer, because you've been waiting for me to talk about us and not just about what I'm accomplishing out here. So, if you've been divorced, if you're going through that pain, you say to Jesus, okay, Jesus, you had to set a boundary with your betrothed and say, you will not see my face again until you're willing to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. How did you experience that pain of cutting off relationship with the one that was
Yes.
supposed to be your bride? If I, am embarrassed and shamed in some situation, I can say, Jesus, they hung you naked on the cross for a reason, to shame you in front of all the people that you'd preached to about how good God was. Here's how I feel when I'm shamed. How did you feel? And he's been tempted in every way that we are, yet without sin. Jesus has felt the things that we've felt. Jesus gets frustrated. How long must I be with you and bear with you? Jesus gets angry. Jesus gets lonely. Could you not wait with me 1 hour? Jesus is betrayed. The last words he hears from Peter are cursing and swearing. And so connect with Jesus about those events in his life, and you will find a deep place of fellowship there, because what we think our heart wants when we're hurt is assurance that we won't get hurt again. What we really want is for someone to be with us in our pain and recognize that it's valid and tell us we're valuable and comfort us. And Jesus is not going to promise you that you will never be hurt again. He doesn't make those
No.
promises,
No.
but he will be with you in it.
it's a lot like parents, right? We can't promise our children that
Right.
they're not going to be hurt, but we can say, we'll be there for you. We'll
Yeah.
help you with the cut knee or the banged head. We'll help you. And we'll do our best to protect you. But yes,
Yeah.
that's a beautiful way to put it. What Tony, what seems to be the transition for people to go from, like, you went from the prayers that you said were default, like do or don't, that kind of
Uh-huh.
thing, into just a conversation. We invite people into that. We invite people, kind of like you were saying, we invite them to go ask Jesus questions about what he's experienced. That's really the invitation that you're
Yeah.
challenging people with.
And to ask him, another form of that prayer is just to identify what your heart longs for. You know, um, I'll go back to the house burning down thing again. Um, that was the fourth most stressful thing that happened in my life that year.
Oh no.
Yes. And I went through this period where I was just so bruised. I would pray like, Jesus, I know I can talk to you whenever I want and you'll talk back, but I just don't feel like talking right now. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to anybody. And Jesus would just be like, that's cool. Trust the process. It'll be all right. And it was eventually. But you can tell him how you feel. And you can also ask him what he thinks of you. Jesus, I'm longing for peace right now. What does your peace for me look like? Jesus, I'm lonely because I just lost a friend. How are you meeting me in that place? Um, and the trick with this kind of prayer is to not put any do in it. I had a pastor I coached once, and I'd give him one of these questions, and he'd always turn it around. Um, Jesus, what do you love about me? And he would pray, Jesus, what do I need to do to be in the center of your love? And I was like, dude, no. This is not about what you do for Jesus. It's about what Jesus does for you.
That's good.
So there's a mobile app called Questions for Jesus that will help you pray this way. It goes through every passage in the first half of Matthew where Jesus speaks to a desire and gives you 5 questions to ask him, and it will play soaking music while you listen and then give you a place to journal. And probably my biggest hint is we only let people listen for 30 seconds to a minute because the first thing you hear is usually right. And oftentimes, the longer we try to listen, the more we start evaluating and analyzing and
Mm-hmm.
confuse ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
yeah,
that's your app? It's called Questions for Jesus?
yes. And it's
Oh,
free.
I love that. I didn't know about that. It's a
Yeah, it's on
free app
Android
I could
and
get on my
Apple.
iPhone called Questions for Jesus. And I love the soaking music too. Oh, I'm going to download that. I did not know about that. Um, well, this has been so fascinating, Tony. What when if you were gonna if someone is really hurting today and you just said, here's a stepping off point that maybe could really help you in your pain today. Anything else practical? You've given us so
Sure.
much practical, but anything else practical that you might speak to them about?
Yeah. So I've sort of specialized in coaching people in the valley seasons of life. When you're in your productive seasons, you co-labor with God and you each do part of the work. When you're in a valley season, you lay on the operating table and Jesus does 98% of the work, and your job is to stay out of the way. So what you want to do is let go of that impulse to try to change my outward circumstances to get back to where I was and say, Jesus, you brought me to this point. You've been at work in my life long before I was aware of it to do something. I may not even know what it is, but you just keep doing what you're doing. And I give you permission to do it. And if I need to lean into it, Tell me how to do that. So, for instance, if you've lost your job, valley seasons are often kicked off by a loss of favor and influence and longtime roles. So instead of spending all your energy getting a new job, God has given you the opportunity to have more time and space for internal renovation. So take some time every day just to be and to allow whatever's happening in you to happen. If you're afraid, figure out why you're afraid. I lost my job. Does this take me back to a wound of my childhood? Does this touch on, my need to control? Okay, if it does, Jesus, you brought me to this point where my need for control just came to the surface. What do you want to do with it? And how do you want me to let you do that? And this whole thing of leaning in means this is your process, not mine. So I'm not going to take over my own transformation. I'm going to let you be the change agent instead of me.
We have a really good friend of the ministry that we're doing a series on addictions this summer. And she was talking about the stages of people getting help. And the first stage is people say, "Oh, Mark, you're drinking too much." "Oh, well, Mark, okay, I need to drink a little less." So Mark tries to drink a little less, but it doesn't work. And then it keeps going and going. And the second stage is, "Oh, maybe you need to stop drinking completely." "Oh, Mark's got to stop drinking. I've got to stop drinking completely." Well, when that doesn't work, you decide, maybe I need some help. Okay, I need some help, but I'm going to determine what the help looks like.
Yeah.
But then when does change happen? Only when you say, I can't do it, God can do it, and I surrender control of how that looks and works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what I just heard you say.
Yeah. And I'd add one more thing. There's a stage before your stage one. And often when I coach people, I find out it started with a prayer that they ask God for something. God, I've been struggling with this. Do something, or I don't want to be this. And so God starts setting a process in motion to bring us to the place where we'll be motivated to change it. And that's a crucial. Jesus says, I can only do the things I see my Father doing. And what I think that means is Jesus is saying, I can't just change people. If I don't see that Father God has started a process in their life to bring them to the point where they're ready to change, I can't just step in and change somebody without that process. So Jesus himself, when he's looking at people, is looking for, has God been arranging people and circumstances in your life to bring you to the place where you're ready to deal with this? And if so, maybe I can bring a word right here. But if not, I'm not saying anything because I only partner with what Father's already doing.
There's a lot of different ways maybe to say that, but you just said that very succinctly. I want to work only where it's clear that the Father is working and he's inviting me to work with him, whether it's in my life or someone else's life.
So where I learned this as a coach is just, I'm a good coach and I've worked with tons of people. So I sit down with someone and I can see a bunch of things that they could change. But the only one that I'm going to address is the one that God has brought to their attention, because that's where Father is working. And the other things, God knows a million things that are wrong with me. He's usually only talking about one or two things at a time.
Yep.
And he can overlook all the other stuff. So can I.
That's good. If he could do it, we can do it. Tell us a little about how to reach you, Tony.
Well, you can find my books are all on Amazon if you just search for my crazy last name.
Got it.
For the heaven thing, there's a website that goes with the book, heavenexperience.net. And one of the cool things there, well, there's study group outlines if you want to take a group on a book study through it. But we've also purchased several thousand copies to give away to seekers and people who are suffering loss. So if you read the book and love it, you can fill out a little 3-minute form on the website and we will send you free books to give away to people in your life who are seekers or are suffering. So that's an offer that's available to everybody.
That's so good.
Yeah, that the Like a Human Being book, there's a website, likeahumanbeing.com, and it has videos and a bunch of background information that goes with the book. There's also a 4-volume set of study materials for studying the book of Mark in this way. They're leaders' guides and study guides. You can get those on Amazon too.
Tony, thank you so much for being on here. So good to reach you from Northern California. God bless you and your family and your ministry. This has been very, very rich.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, let's do it again sometime.
That'll be awesome. Thanks for being with us on SoulSense. If something today resonated with you, take a moment, write it down and reflect on it. And help us reach other people by subscribing, liking, leaving a comment, and sharing. We'll see you next time.